What happens when a Hollywood icon who spent her life fighting for privacy sits down on a show where controversy is the house specialty? Tonight, we uncover how a polite interview with Graham Norton turned into an all-out televised disaster as Emma Watson's patience shattered under the studio lights. Stick around because this showdown only gets hotter. It started as a charming chat and ended in chaos. Before you judge, hear every biting word that pushed Emma Watson over the edge. This isn't just another celebrity interview. It's a reputation reckoning. The studio was buzzing with excitement that night. The famous red sofa glowed under the lights. The audience murmured in anticipation. And Graham Norton was in his element, sipping water, checking his cards. That trademark mischievous grin plastered across his face. Everything was set for another entertaining evening. When Emma Watson walked onto the set, the cheers were deafening. Dressed in a perfectly tailored, sustainable vintage suit, a crisp white blouse, and bold red lipstick, her usual blend of intellectual chic and movie star glamour, Emma smiled and waved, giving that familiar poised smile that had charmed the world since she was a child. She shook hands with Graham, then slid into her seat at the far end of the sofa. "Emma, darling," Graham said warmly, adjusting his cards as the applause faded. "It's not often we get the brightest witch of her age on this sofa. How are you? How's life treating you these days?" Emma chuckled politely. "I'm good, Graham, thank you. Busy, lots of work with the UN, directing, and trying to just live a little more authentically these days." The audience clapped again. Graham nodded thoughtfully, his eyes glinting. Yes, authenticity," he mused. "We'll get to that later because I imagine authenticity is hard when the whole world thinks they own your childhood. But for now, let's talk about your latest projects. There's a new directorial piece coming out soon, isn't there?" Emma smiled slightly and nodded, explaining the importance of female gazes in cinema and giving underrepresented voices a platform. She spoke eloquently, and the audience nodded approvingly. For the first 5 minutes, everything was smooth. Graham threw in a few light-hearted jokes about magic wands. Emma played along. Laughter bounced around the studio, but then Graham's questions started to lean sharper. So Graham began, his smile still friendly, but his tone just a little more pointed. "You stepping back from acting? Or is it retiring or simply vanishing? I lose track. What exactly would you call it?" Emma's jaw stiffened slightly, though her smile remained. "I just wanted to focus on my advocacy and my own growth, that's all. No big mystery." "Of course," Graham said lightly. "But you do realize it looks to everyone else like you turned your back on the industry that made you. One day a global superstar, the next, well, an activist with a very selective public presence. Was that always the plan?" The audience chuckled, unsure if they were supposed to. Emma's expression tightened. "It's not turning my back if I'm walking away from a system that was becoming toxic for me," she shot back quickly. Graham raised his eyebrows, but maintained his composure. "Ah, toxic," he echoed, tapping his cards. "That word comes up a lot when people talk about your relationship with fame. Toxic press, toxic expectations, toxic fans. Is there anything about being a movie star you did like?" Emma leaned back and crossed her arms, her tone noticeably colder now. "That's not a fair question. I gave my entire childhood to this industry and to those stories. But when it started consuming the person I was trying to become, it was time to redraw the boundaries." "Consuming?" Graham pressed, still smiling, but with a glint in his eye. "Because of the paparazzi or because of the job itself?" Emma's voice dropped half an octave. "Both." The temperature in the room shifted slightly. The audience sensed something building. Graham, unfazed, flipped to his next card. "Well, on that note, let's talk about your activism. Many people feel that Hollywood actors lecturing the public on how to live never quite sits right. Some even say it comes across as performative. How do you respond to that?" Emma's smile was gone now. She stared straight at Graham and said very flatly, "That's cynical and frankly a ridiculous question." Graham gave a little laugh and held up his hands. "No offense intended. I'm just asking what's already out there. These are the things people say." Emma leaned forward slightly. Maybe people shouldn't say things they know nothing about. A ripple of unease moved through the audience. Graham sensed it too, but he wasn't backing down. Of course, he replied smoothly. But let's be honest, you stepped away from the blockbusters, cut ties with the machine, and yet you still keep popping up on high-fashion magazine covers and front rows at Fashion Week. If you wanted a normal life so badly, why not just fade quietly into the background? That was the moment Emma's calm veneer began to crack. She let out a short laugh, but it wasn't warm. "You really don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice laced with irritation. Graham tilted his head slightly. "Oh, I think I get it, but I'm curious to hear you explain it." Emma's eyes flashed. "It's not about disappearing. It's about utilizing the platform I have on my own terms, telling stories that matter before people like you twist them into something superficial." Graham sat back, fingers steepled. "Ah, so we're the problem." Amal didn't answer. The tension was palpable now. The audience sat still, the cameras rolling, every pair of eyes locked on the two as the temperature in the studio seemed to rise degree by degree. And this was only the beginning. The audience didn't dare breathe. Even the studio lights seemed hotter now. Emma sat rigid on the famous red sofa, her jaw tense, her knuckles white on the armrest. Graham, by contrast, sat with the relaxed elegance of a man who'd seen 1,000 tense interviews before. But he could sense the powder keg he was sitting next to, and he was striking matches anyway. "Well," Graham said after a beat, his smile almost apologetic, but his eyes glinting with challenge. "You've made it very clear you wanted to control your own narrative, Emma. But surely you can see how it looks a little contradictory. You asked for privacy, for a break from the gaze, and yet here you are on my show in front of millions of people promoting your directing, your gin brand, your causes. It's all rather public, isn't it?" Emma's lip curled ever so slightly. "There's a big difference between reclaiming your voice and letting the tabloids monetize your silence." "Ah," Graham mused, leaning forward slightly. "But doesn't reclaiming your voice invite scrutiny? The more you preach, the more people will analyze. You can't really expect the world to simply accept your version of morality without question, can you?" Emma's eyes narrowed. "You mean your version?" Graham chuckled softly. "I don't have a version, Emma. I just have questions." There it was, a flash of red in Emma's cheeks. "And those questions are the same ones people like you have been asking for years to diminish women with opinions. You don't care about the answers. You just want a soundbite." The audience murmured. Graham smiled tightly, steepling his fingers. "All right then," he said. "Let me try something different. You've said publicly that you felt sexualized and unsupported by the industry during your transition from child star to adult. Can you tell us specifically what support you expected? What help you asked for that was denied?" Emma exhaled sharply through her nose. "I expected them to see me as a human being, not a product. To allow me to grow up without counting down the days until I was legal. And they didn't." "They didn't," Emma snapped. "Next question." Graham raised an eyebrow but continued, flipping to the next card. "Very well. You've also said that misogyny played a large role in your disillusionment with acting. But many in the public feel that criticism of your recent work was more about your preachiness than your gender. Do you think you're being entirely fair when you paint it all with the brush of misogyny?" Emma's head jerked back as though she'd been slapped. "Excuse me," she said, her voice icy. "It's just a question," Graham said, his tone even. "Some feel you've used accusations of sexism to silence legitimate criticism of your activism. Do you see how that might come across?" Emma leaned forward now, her voice rising. "No, Graham. What I see is someone trying to justify bigotry because it's dressed up as opinion." The audience gasped at the sharpness of her tone. Graham didn't flinch. "Of course," he said calmly. "But isn't it also dangerous to assume that every negative comment is rooted in hatred? Sometimes people simply don't agree with you or your methods. That's not necessarily prejudice, is it?" Emma was glaring now. "You're walking a fine line, Graham. A very fine line." Graham's smile tightened into something colder. "I'm walking the same line I walk with every guest, Emma. I ask questions the public wants answered. If those questions upset you, perhaps that says more about the answers than about me." The air between them was electric now. The other guests on the sofa had shrunk into the shadows, visibly uncomfortable. Even the audience, so loud and lively at the beginning, was hushed now, hanging on every syllable. "All right," Graham continued after a long pause. "Let's move on. You've described the film industry as a machine. Some would say that sounds rather ungrateful for the system that gave you the platform you use today. Do you feel there's still respect there, or is it just resentment at this point?" Emma's nostrils flared, her fingers digging into the sofa cushion. "I respect the art," she said slowly, her voice low and tense. "But respect isn't enough when the industry only values you as long as you're compliant." "Interesting," Graham murmured. "Do you think the fans feel the same about you, that you've been ungrateful to them?" Emma turned sharply toward him. "You don't know my fans. You don't know me, so don't pretend you understand the relationship I have with the people who grew up with me." Graham's tone stayed smooth as silk. "I'm only asking what millions of viewers are already thinking." Emma shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You're not asking, you're accusing. That's what you do, isn't it? Dress up mockery and judgment as entertainment." Graham's smile flickered. "Entertainment and journalism aren't mutually exclusive," he replied softly. Emma's voice rose a notch, her composure beginning to crack. "You think this is journalism? You think dragging people onto your sofa and picking them apart like they're specimens in a jar is journalism?" "Emma," Graham began, but Emma cut him off, her voice sharp now, slicing through the studio's silence. "No, don't Emma me. You sit there with your cards and your smirk, and you think you can just toy with people. You think because you make people laugh, you're not hurting anyone, but you are. You're just too smug to see it." The words hung in the air. The silence was deafening. For the first time all night, Graham's expression hardened. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto Emma's. "And you," he said evenly, his voice quiet but edged with steel. "Think because you're virtuous, you're beyond reproach. But you're not. You came here knowing the questions that would come, and now you're proving exactly why people think you can't handle them." Emma froze, her eyes blazing, her breath coming faster. The audience sat in stunned silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a dull knife. Emma's hands trembled slightly in her lap, and for a brief moment, it looked like she might walk off right then. But instead, she stayed. For now. For a few seconds, the entire studio was frozen. The audience sat wide-eyed and silent, the air thick with unease. The cameras kept rolling, capturing everything. The tightness in Emma's awe, the faint glimmer of challenge in Graham's eyes, and the awkward, almost frightened expressions of the other guests on the sofa, who looked like they wanted to melt into the cushions. Emma's breathing was audible now, shallow but quick. Her posture was rigid, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Graham, in stark contrast, leaned back in his chair with calm precision, his fingers steepled in front of him. The silence was broken when Graham gently said, "You seem upset." The words were soft but sharp, like a surgeon's scalpel. Emma's head snapped toward him, her eyes blazing. "Upset? You think this is upset? You sit here, Graham, making veiled jabs at me, at my choices, at my integrity, and you think I don't notice? You think I don't know exactly what you're doing?" Graham's expression didn't change. "And what exactly am I doing?" "You're turning me into a spectacle," Emma hissed. "That's what you do. That's what this show does. You bring people here, make them feel welcome, then cut them down for sport, all while pretending it's just a bit of harmless fun." Graham tilted his head slightly, his voice still measured. "And you came anyway, knowing all that. Why?" The question seemed to strike Emma like a physical blow. She blinked hard as though trying to compose herself, but the anger didn't fade. "I came because I thought maybe you'd be different," she spat. "Maybe you'd treat me like a human being, not just another headline." Graham's smile hardened, though it never reached his eyes. "I've treated you exactly like every other guest who sat here. Nothing more, nothing less. You're the one who seems to think the rules shouldn't apply to you." Emma's fist clenched on her knees. "Oh, don't give me that sanctimonious nonsense," she snapped. "You think you're better than the tabloids just because you say it with a laugh, but you're not. You're worse. At least they're honest about what they are." The audience let out a collective murmur at that, some gasping softly. Graham's brow furrowed, his tone sharpening ever so slightly. Worse? You're accusing me of being worse than the papers that stalked you as a child? Is that what you're saying? Emma shot to her feet and her face flushed with rage. Don't you dare bring my childhood into this, she shouted, her voice echoing across the studio. Don't you dare. Even Graham leaned back slightly at the sudden eruption. The other guests froze, their eyes darting between the two. Emma, Graham said after a moment, and his voice even but with an unmistakable edge. You've spent years invoking your past when it suits your narrative, but when someone else does it, suddenly it's off limits. That's a double standard, isn't it? Emma's chest heaved as she glared down at Graham. You don't know what you're talking about, she said through gritted teeth. Then explain it to me, Graham pressed, still seated, still calm. Help me understand. Help the audience understand. You keep saying you want your truth to be heard, so tell it. But don't stand there and accuse everyone of bad faith just because the questions are hard. Emma laughed bitterly, shaking her head. You think this is about hard questions. You think this is journalism. This is just another circus. You don't care about answers. You don't care about truth. You just care about how many people tune in to watch me squirm. Graham's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't look away. That's an interesting theory, he said quietly. But the only one making you squirm is you. That was it. Emma's composure finally broke. Her voice rose to a near shout, her diction sharper than ever. You think this is a show, don't you? You think this is all just good fun. You think people's lives, my life, is just entertainment for you to poke at and laugh about. Well, congratulations, Graham. You've gotten what you wanted. She took a step closer to the host desk, her face twisted with fury. But let me tell you something. This isn't just some joke. This isn't some game. You're playing with people's lives and you don't even care. You call yourself a host, a journalist, whatever, but you're just another bully with a microphone and an audience. The audience was dead silent now. Not even a cough, not even a whisper, just the faint hum of the studio lights and the sound of Emma's ragged breathing. Graham's eyes narrowed, and for the first time all night, his voice carried a chill that cut through the air. If that's how you feel, Emma, then perhaps you shouldn't have come, because nobody forced you into that chair. You chose to sit there. You chose to speak. And now that the questions don't suit you, you are calling me a bully. Emma leaned across the desk, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, though the microphone still picked it up clearly. You don't deserve to sit there. You don't deserve to talk about people like me. You're a parasite. You invite people here just to humiliate them, to make them look small so you can feel big. The words hung in the air, heavy and bitter. Graham didn't flinch, though his jaw tightened. He stood slowly, matching Emma's height in her heels, and the two of them locked eyes, neither willing to break. Maybe, Graham said finally, his voice low but firm. You should ask yourself why you feel so small in the first place. That was the final spark. Emma slammed her microphone down onto the desk so hard the audience jumped. Her voice boomed, raw and full of fury. That's it. I'm done. You think you can drag me and my work through the mud and call it entertainment? You think you're clever? You think you're better than everyone you humiliate up here? Well, you're not. You're pathetic. This whole show is pathetic. She turned to the audience now, gesturing broadly with one arm. And you lot, you sit here laughing along while he tears people to shreds. Do you feel good about yourselves? Do you? Nobody answered. Emma turned back to Graham, her voice shaking with rage, but loud enough to fill the room. You are everything that's wrong with this industry, with this world. You dress up cruelty as wit and call it a job. Well, you can keep it, Graham, because I won't play your game. And with that, she turned sharply and stormed toward the exit. The cameras followed her as her footsteps echoed against the studio floor, her back straight, her fists still clenched. Graham remained standing behind his desk, his expression unreadable, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. The door closed behind Emma with a deafening thud. The audience sat frozen, and Graham, after a long, heavy pause, finally exhaled and said softly, almost to himself, "Well, that escalated quickly." The camera zoomed in on his face as he straightened his jacket. his eyes still fixed on the door where Emma had disappeared. The door slammed shut behind her with an echo that seemed to reverberate through every corner of the studio. For several long, breathless seconds, the audience simply sat there, stunned. No one clapped. No one spoke. The sound of Emma's angry footsteps faded down the corridor beyond the set, and then nothing but silence. The other guests on the sofa exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure whether they should stay put or quietly slip away. The camera stayed locked on Graham, who stood behind his desk, hands resting on the wood, staring at the door through which Emma had exited. Then finally, Graham straightened his jacket, let out a slow breath, and turned back to face the audience, his signature wry smile returning, though this time yet with steel. "Well," he said dryly, "that was festive." A ripple of nervous laughter swept through the audience, breaking the spell. Some clapped politely. Graham held up a hand to quiet them, his tone suddenly serious. "Look," he began, "I want to say something here, because clearly tonight went in a direction none of us expected, least of all me. But here's the thing." He paused, scanning the audience, and then glancing straight into the camera. "I've been doing this job a very long time," he said, his voice even but deliberate. "And in that time, I've had everyone on this sofa, rock stars, presidents, prime ministers, actors, authors, saints and sinners. Some of them charming, some of them difficult, all of them human." He tapped the desk lightly. "And what we do here on this stage is ask questions. Sometimes they're easy questions. Sometimes they're hard, but they're questions people deserve to hear answered. That's not bullying. That's not cruelty. That's conversation. And if a guest can't handle that, perhaps they shouldn't agree to sit in this chair." The audience broke into scattered applause, though Graham waved it down with a faint smile. "I have nothing but sympathy for Emma's struggles," he continued, his voice softening just slightly, "for what she went through growing up in the spotlight and what she continues to endure. But sympathy," he added, his tone sharpening again, "doesn't exempt anyone from scrutiny, especially when they voluntarily put themselves in the public eye." He leaned forward now, his eyes glittering. "Because make no mistake," Wine said, "that wasn't me attacking her, that was her attacking herself. What you just saw wasn't cruelty from me. It was a person so determined to control the narrative that she couldn't stand being asked the simplest questions about it. And that says more about her than it does about me." The audience murmured in agreement, some even clapping again, louder this time. Graham's gaze drifted to the floor for a moment, then back to the camera. "And to Emma, if you're watching this later, I wish you nothing but peace. But if you come here to tell your story, don't expect me or anyone else to just nod along and smile, because that's not honesty, that's theater. And this show is not theater. This is a conversation." He gave a faint shrug, then sat back down in his chair, picking up a cue card. "Well," he said, his signature wit re-emerging to lighten the mood, "that was Emma Watson, everyone, for about 15 minutes. The audience laughed, this time more freely, the tension finally breaking. "Anyway, Graham said, glancing at the other guests still seated on the sofa, who were now visibly relieved. "Coming up next, we'll be joined by someone who doesn't mind answering questions, or at least hasn't stormed off yet." The camera pulled back slightly as Graham chuckled softly to himself, shuffling his cards as if nothing had happened, though the slight smirk on his face said otherwise. But then he looked straight into the lens one last time, his eyes narrowing playfully. "And for anyone at home who's upset by what you've just seen, don't be," he said, "because the truth has a way of coming out, whether you like it or not. And tonight you all saw it for yourselves." He leaned back, spread his arms casually, and let the studio lights shine down on him as the applause swelled around him once more. And there you have it, the unforgettable night Emma Watson stormed off the Graham Norton show, leaving a stunned audience and a host who refused to back down. If you enjoyed this behind-the-scenes breakdown of one of the most intense talk show moments ever, don't forget to hit that like button. Leave a comment below. Do you think Graham went too far, or was Emma out of line? And of course, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth may be uncomfortable, but it's always worth hearing.